Mountains of Madness, kind of, in a way for me, it wraps together a lot of the mythos. So it's got Cthulhu, it's got the Great Old Ones, it's got the eons old city that they find, but it's also kind of like almost like a 1920s Discovery newsreel to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like those old, like...
Indiana Jones-ish.
Indiana Jones, like...
They're firing off the dispatches.
They're firing off dispatches, and it's like, discoverers down in South Antarctica find new mountains.
Twirling
See
newspaper.
it on News 11. Yeah, right? Like, it tapped into that zeitgeist of the time where, oh shit, the world is bigger than we think it is.
Right.
Look at what we found.
Well, it was really, truly, at that point, the last frontier that mankind could tap would have been the South Pole.
Yeah, we couldn't go in the oceans as deep as we can now then, so it really was novel in that way for me, and I appreciated that. Like, new setting, blank slate with the setting and everything.
I like that
it was
a lot.
interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, to me, Mountains of Madness is the pinnacle of Lovecraft. I feel like with almost every Lovecraft story, you know, even though I'm obviously a fanboy, I would find something that the literary side of me can say this or that is obviously flawed. I just enjoy it anyway. To me, At the Mountains of Madness is the one that I cannot criticize. I just, I feel like this was his masterpiece. I feel like, he had several attempts at writing a novel or a novella. The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath or Kadath, which I had briefly toyed with us reading, was one, and there was a couple others, but this was the one where he really, fully committed, and it was, I think, just a profound achievement. I really think that this is, if I were going to put any piece of Lovecraft in the hands of anybody and say, read this, and if you don't like this, then quit now, this would be the one. This would be the one that I would use to try to sell people.
I can see it. I mean, it really does have a little bit of everything. It's got his abstract descriptions of things, hinting and alluding at things, but there's actual action too.
Yes.
You see the monsters buried. You see the five-pointed vegetable
right
buried with their five-pointed dots.
Right, the star-shaped head, the dots that make a big point in the dots.
Yeah. There is a description of the incisions and the autopsies of the people in the camp when they find them.
Yeah.
And then there's the descriptions of the catacombs or the Great Old City, which, my only beef, it's not really a literary thing, it's kind of like a plot device. For as short a time as they were in the Great Old City, they sure fuck learned a lot of that history, man.
Yeah.
They understood those, what's the word I'm thinking of? They understood those
bas reliefs or
those
bas
reliefs and
those.
There's another word that he used. It just the word bothered me.
And this is something. This is from an earlier. It was a concept from an earlier Lovecraft story called might be the Nameless City. I forget. But there's one where someone, and this actually, I believe that story might be the first time that Necronomicon is used in Lovecraft's.
Nameless City is
that what it's called? Yeah. So in
is.
that one, it's a similar premise. A guy goes and he finds like this like ridiculously ancient city, like predating ancient Egypt and everything in the desert. And as he sort of like descends down into it underground, there's like these bas reliefs of these lizard people, which he presumes are meant to be like this was symbolic to the culture, so they represented themselves as lizards, the way ancient Egyptians would use like dogs and cats and stuff like that. And he learns from studying the architecture and the bas reliefs, he learns their entire history and he relates it all to us, only to realize that as he continues his subterranean descent, that they actually still exist down there in this like, abyss in the middle of the world and everything. So it was sort of like a primitive concept that he was trying out that he brought back again in much more detail At the Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, definitely, as you do. I'm sorry, I'm getting lost in the prose again as I'm scrolling through the word. literally getting lost in the prose, not like metaphorically.
And what's interesting, I think, is that at the Mountains of Madness, by this point in his career, he had toned down the prose a little bit. You know, and his earlier...
You do feel it, yeah.
I mean, if you read his earlier stuff, especially the stuff that's inspired by Lord Dunsany, however you say that, it's even more, you know, ridiculously overwrought.
I thought this one was, I'm sure I have it backwards, but it's like reminiscent of The Thing.
Oh, no, John Carpenter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Reminiscent of.
I'm sure John Carpenter took an impression of the separate cyclopean blocks which Lake had.
John Carpenter was actually doing a riff on an earlier 1950s movie called The Thing, but it was the same idea, and it just had that very much similar kind of feel to this. One of the things that I really liked about it was that sense of exploration, that sense of the new. He really brought in that scientific analysis. Oh, we found these things. It was pretty amazing. These new drill techniques. We did an autopsy. What I found interesting that as I'm reading, I'm going okay. And I started trying to figure this out. So these old ones that they had unearthed in this cavern that they'd found, that the original expedition had found and brought up, that eventually wound up slaughtering them all and trying to carve them up. They must have been older old ones because they were hardier and could survive. But why didn't the newer old ones preserve them somehow? Or if they could live that long, or if they could be that dormant, wouldn't they have discovered their elders and brought them back? There's a lot of weird plot holes in it.
They forget a lot, actually.
They do.
But they learned that from the base reliefs. They forgot so much of their own history.
Yes.
As they devolved into these sewer dwellers.
They can tell from the art, itself, descending into a lower
less
style,
decadent,
more vulgar style.
Sothoth or Gothoth or whatever become whatever.
Decadent, yeah. I mean, it's that's one thing as many times as I've read this, which is many times. I've never fully answered that question to my satisfaction, but it's sort of the Cthulhu thing, right? For whatever reason, they appear to eventually, at some point, at some stage, they go into some slumber where they can be resurrected. But I don't think it's ever fully explained why.
They were hardy enough to fly from some distant galaxy or whatever.
Another skill they lose.
But they forget. They
forgot how to do that.
They also forget how to make organic matter live from inorganic matter.
Yeah, they can no longer manipulate matter.
They were gods, and they became plebes.
But I want to talk about that because I'm gonna dip back into my 12-year-old self here, and that was the chapter that, to me, I was blown away by. I was enjoying the story. But then when it went into the whole history, this mythology of this race that came from, they were already an established race across the stars, right? And then they came down to Earth, and they spread across the Earth, and they had cities, and they were underwater and on land and everything. And then throughout the course of their hundreds of thousands of years of history, other races descend, and that's when you said he ties together. Cthulhu comes down, and he spawns his whole race of mini Cthulhus, and the Mygo or the Migo or whatever come down. The crab people, he brings in all of his shit. Yeah, and then there's wars fought, and they rise and ascend like empires, and they eventually go into this slow decline, and they descend slowly back to their original landing point. And everything that whole chapter to me was sparks were fireworks going off in my brain at age 12. It was incredible.
The best part of all of that are those unnamed mountains of horror beyond the other mountains.
Right, there are bigger mountains.
Right. Because what Lovecraft did here was very un-Lovecraftian. He decided he was going to tell you fucking everything. He was going to give you every detail.
60 pages.
So in order to maintain the cosmic horror, there had to be a different thing.
Something else that was terrifying even to the degree.
Even more so. And of course, just like it's always that detached perspective, it wasn't the narrator, but it was the dude in the plane with the narrator who saw that shit, and he'll never speak of it.
Because he went crazy. He went mad glimpsing the other mountains of madness.
Lucid sometimes, but most of the time he just lapses into his insanity.
If only he would tell me and relieve himself of this
the burden,
madness.
yes.
Yeah. I actually couldn't find the word we were looking for. because I got lost in other words.
It's BAS relief.
Yeah.
We just need to know how
Bas
to
relief,
pronounce it.
but he calls it a couple other things, like there's arabesques,
Yeah.
bas reliefs,
Yes.
and then there's a third one that was bothering me. I couldn't come up with.
Carvings. It's fucking carvings.
You know what really gets me, actually, and this is just a dumb thing. They talk about leaving the paper trail as they walk through the city, because you don't want to get lost. And he's like, well, we almost ran out of paper. It would be such a big deal to put rock chippings in the walls. We won't do it.
Yeah.
What does it take to put, like, an X in a wall?
Well, I think his point was
Or
that it
he
would
doesn't
be
wanna
like
damage the
sabotaging.
city.
Yeah, I mean, like if you discovered like some like new
The penguins will be pissed.
tomb in Egypt or something, you wouldn't like chip the shit.
You know, what
right?
pissed me off is he kept talking about these giant cube-like structures in the side of a mountain higher than Everest, and I'm like, and you fucking couldn't figure out that shit was made by something.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, the implication, we don't know what it means. It's like, it must be some kind of basalt construction we have no knowledge of. I'm like, no, motherfucker, those are windows.
People did that.
Those are doors. Those are fucking cubes. Jesus.
That reminds me, there's actually a point, you mentioned Everest, there's actually a point in the one dispatch from like whatever the advanced guy is who he says, he's like, these are like, must be easily X amount of feet. Everest is out of the running. It's like, there's a contest of mountains and Everest is out. It's disqualified.
Yeah. You know, though, like, to be fair, that moment of like, no, motherfucker, you're going to get killed. Happens in every horror film.
Oh,
You know, as the
point,
reader,
good
it's
point.
almost dramatic irony. You know that and they don't.
No,
The
it's
corpse
true.
is going to come to life.
Yeah.
Yeah, something.
Don't
yeah.
answer the
He
goddamn
hints at it.
phone.
Oh, there's the heat, the smell, the dogs are going nuts. It was all
What
built
you know
there.
what I
Come on,
love
man.
about this is like there's that scene, right? And you know, like I mean, if you have a good imagination, you can picture those fucking things coming to life and just tearing the shit out of everything, right? And that's great. But what I really love about this is that later on in the story, the narrator then, when he has a better understanding of what's happened, he re-envisions that scene and he actually feels sympathy for these old ones.
Yeah.
And he talks about like, imagine being resurrected from like an ages old slumber and in a completely unrecognizable frozen landscape and surrounded by creatures that you don't know what they are and recognize them, and these snarling dogs that are trying to kill you. And realizing like, this is what you wake up to. And I think that is like one of the little things that adds texture to the story, is the way that those creatures that early on are fucking horrifying and almost cliche in horror, later on you're like, oh fuck, like those, imagine their plight, imagine that.
No, I agree. He definitely flips the script on your expectations on that. And, King and Kodos are actually empathetic. It's a little different.
I have trouble waking up when my 6-year-old is like ready to go, and he's like all energetic and shit, and I know where I'm waking up, and it hasn't been eons
Let alone
of sleep
past
the Archean time period of Precambrians. No, so yeah, I get that. I do appreciate that. I said, I'm just gonna keep coming back to Archean. I want to slip in Jurassic as well, but that's nowhere near the right time period.
I think he mentions the Cretaceous.
He does mention Cretaceous. I do have to say, I think that unfortunately science has moved beyond some of his verbiage when it comes to like eons and
no
Yeah,
question.
he read National Geographic and he dropped some shit, but that was
from the 20s.
Yeah,
And that's
I mean, that's fine because science
fiction.
changes.
Yeah,
Science changes for sure. Any last words on Mountains of Madness before we talk about the problem with his racism? We're going to shift hard to that one.
I think we should probably move on. It was that was one of the better of the stories.
Yeah, I think we all enjoyed it. Yeah. It just, we get, as people who consume literature for fun and a job, that we can be a little bit nitpickier than most, especially when we are reading in a genre we really like and are well versed.
Yeah, and this is a good, it's a sort of inversion of our Ghostbusters cast too, where I said to you guys at the time, I was like, it was good. I mean, it was fine. I was like, but the difference is that I didn't see it when I was a kid. I didn't grow up watching it over and over again, and I'm watching it now as someone in my late 30s, and like I said, it was good. It was fine, but I think it's sort of the reverse here. I've often wondered. I think Sean and I discussed at one point, where I said I'm interested to see what your perspective is coming to it now, because I wonder what my perspective would be coming to it now. I don't know what that is because I was so young when I discovered Lovecraft. I was so impressionable. And, a huge part of reading the stories for me now is the nostalgia. It's the thing I grew up with that I loved so much. And it's impossible for me to separate that from the stories.
It's like me with Lord of the Rings. I'm so inimicably tied into my early love of it. And when like my daughter read it and she was just sort of like, meh. Yeah. I was just sort of like, what?
They're not my child.
I know. But I had to come to grips with the fact that, it hit me at a certain point in my life, and it was just the right chord to be plucked at that time. And for her, it was just didn't hit the same resonance. So.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
So racism.
Yeah. I think I felt it most in Call of Cthulhu when he's talking about the cults and like the Caribs. And I mean, I think you said it one time, Mike, you can't look with 2021 eyes at, books written in the past and then say like, well, that was racist because
I think
that
you can and you can't.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's...
We would say it's racism, but we wouldn't say like, okay, it's unfair to impugn that upon the author at that point in time.
I came into this reading it with that prior knowledge from the City crap that we read, and just like my understanding, just my feeling of like, oh well, then this guy's got to be just dripping with absolute horror and his racism, and I'm like, oh, I mean, yeah, I see it, but it's like that casual, like 20s, 30s sort of like.
Yeah. I teach Brit Lit sometimes. Yeah, this is pretty much what the British said.
I can't I have to take that grain of salt with it because that was, and I don't want to apologize for it because it was still wrong, but that was the prevailing attitude at the time. But then I read a little deeper about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I did not do, so take me to school.
He wrote some essays about like...
Not essays, letters.
Oh boy, they were like...
Overtly.
Emphatically racist.
Stuff?
Yeah. Like the on the advent of the Negro or something. Like just things that were like... Basically, like phrenology, like this whole thing, like pseudoscience garbage, and it's like, oh, this guy was off the deep end. Like not even that casual like white misunderstanding of others.
Like your grandfather says things, and you realize now that that's not appropriate. But grandfather grew up in a different age.
But
it was not like
he didn't understand it.
Yeah,
like we do.
Exactly. Lovecraft was
he fucking understood it
straight off.
It was like off the deep end.
Yeah, he was wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
He understood it was wrong. Was like, no, I'm going to choose that end.
Did like speaking engagements, writings on it, like was like so adamantly. Almost Hitler-esque.
I was just about to say, being that he was a writer in the late 20s, would he have been like someone who Hitler would have tapped and been like, hey, you want to do some radio? I've got T.S. Eliot and I've got some other guys here.
I could see him on the periphery of the American Nazi Party all day. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's... I literally do not begrudge anybody who says that, they do not want to read Lovecraft because he was a racist. I get it. I understand it. I feel like if I came to Lovecraft now for the first time, knowing all of that, I mean, I just would feel like I wouldn't want to read him in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't even want to be like, well, let me read and then decide. I just would feel like I'm not interested. So, I get all that. I think it is different for those of us who grew up with Lovecraft for, 15 years before any of that, was that. I didn't realize that. If I started reading when I was 12, I was in my early
12. You wouldn't have
in my early 20s before I ever heard any of it, right? And and it's there. It's in the fiction, in the sense of the narrators are always people who feel that they're surrounded by, just ugly, terrifying things that are alien to them and that are threatening to them. The racism is there in that sense. And occasionally it's there in a more literal way. Some of the descriptions of the people in New England as like immigrants who came and moved to the country is like... Exactly. Like some of that stuff you're like, yeah, not cool, man. Not cool. You see it now. But I have, and I'm not gonna claim credit for this thought. I'm gonna give credit to other people, great artists and thinkers who have had this thought that I've read. And he has great acolytes, like people who are huge fans of his, who are not, just white people. Guillermo del Toro, Oscar award-winning, brilliant director, is a huge fan of Lovecraft, and we'll get all into this when we go into the pop culture. But what these people tend to argue is the fiction could not have been what it was without the flaws of the man. It was that state of his, just fear of the other and his constant state of feeling like he is surrounded by things that he doesn't understand that are threatening that led to the fiction. And that if Lovecraft had been a better man, then he would have made worse fiction. And
is that why I suck at writing?
Because you're a good man. That's what it is. Exactly. No, and you know what I mean? You can agree with that or you can disagree with that. I think that there is some validity to it for those of us who grew up reading Lovecraft and love Lovecraft. The stories could not exist without the flawed human being. It was that mentality.
I can't agree more. I think as students of literature ourselves, we all understand that when we get into that sort of meta-analysis of work, and you start to look at how the author's life influences the work, you realize very quickly that nearly every very talented author is fucked up. They have something wrong. Something is not... It's just... Think about it. Think of all the great authors.
Yeah.
There's always some flaw, some break, some missing piece in the puzzle, something that drives them to work so hard on that craft, maybe to fill those voids or whatever it is, or to make up for those lapses in humanity, whatever. So I'm not apologizing for Lovecraft and saying that he should get a pass on his obvious xenophobia and racism and everything else,
right.
But that you're right. It's a part of the work, and you have to understand it, you have to acknowledge it, but at the same time, it, like any other, work of historical, honestly, historical fiction doesn't work in this case, but...
Historical work of...
Fiction from history? I don't know.
Yeah.
Different eras.
Speculative fiction.
That is a part of your analysis. That is a part of your understanding of it. You have to make your peace with it. Otherwise, 90% of all human writing, we would just have to throw it away because humans are flawed. We are flawed creatures. We are not perfect. We strive for perfection. We try to achieve it as much as we possibly can, and some actively work against it.
Right.
But that is the nature of the beast.
Well, we're sitting in a room right now where I have much paraphernalia on the wall for Hunter S. Thompson.
It's a glorious studio, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But, Hunter S. Thompson was, about as fucked up of a person as you could possibly imagine. And, he wrote books that are just, so meaningful to so many people. And we live in a country where the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that we live by were slave owners. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's you just noticing that right there,
pointing to a Return of the Jedi poster.
Yes,
I just saw that. That's
because
fantastic.
of slave owning, or because you just saw it?
No, it's the original. It's great.
This is from the 1980s. This was given to me by an in-law. Actually, gave that poster to me recently. So
slick.
But, to return to the point, and to return to your point, the many of the great authors were not perfect people. And I think that most people are not perfect people. And, the art, if you want to make the argument that you cannot separate the art from the artist, I don't begrudge that. I'm not going to tell anyone that, hey, listen, you need to forget all that racist shit and you need to read Lovecraft. I'm not going to tell anybody that. If that's where if you have already understood Lovecraft to be a racist, and for that reason you do not want to read the fiction, I feel like I would probably be right there with you. If there was an author that I learned about now for the first time that I knew to be racist, I'd be like, I just don't even want to go down that road. Yeah. So I get that. But, I think that for when you come at it from the reverse and you learn in retrospect about these people that you already admire and you learn about their flaws, then you have to do your own soul searching and you have to decide, is this a problem for me? And for me, Lovecraft's racism is a problem, but not to the point where I'm like, I mean, it's not enough to ruin the fiction. The fiction remains what I always loved, and I'll always continue to read it.
I think it's clear, because of his racism and xenophobia, that he's a scared person. And you can't write paranoid fiction about worlds you don't understand if you're not a scared-ass person. Like, wasn't Poe very similar to?
Yeah.
Where he was just terrified of the whole world and people.
Yeah.
And so, like, he was an awful person who used that to try to understand the world in a way that still wasn't really okay by our standards, but wrote some creepy-ass shit that, I like how you said, you know, you can read it and say, well, he's a terrible person. This fiction is intriguing, and maybe I can learn something of my own self from it. But you can also say, well, there's other fiction I can read out there because this person's a racist. I'm not going to support.
Well, it's a choice you can make, and you don't have to, just because you've read something from Lovecraft doesn't make you a racist.
Yeah. You could also buy his book and then donate to the ACLU or something.
Go to the library like I did and not pay for it.
Not even pay for it. That's right.
There you go.
Yeah, like everything, it's complicated,
right?
In many ways, but I like realizing that people are complicated in general.
Agreed, and I think that we should not be afraid to engage with these things. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that it's okay to engage with things that are complicated and that make us uncomfortable. And again, that's not to say that everybody has to do it. But I think you just said it. Reading Lovecraft does not mean that you are racist any more than watching a violent movie or listening to like violent rap music is going to make you a violent person. You know what I'm saying? Like idea that video games, you know, it's this sort of idea that video games turn people into violent lunatics. And of course that's widely debunked and there's no evidence supporting that whatsoever. And I think it's the same. There you go. I think it's the same thing with authors like Lovecraft. You know, I mean, like another example is Flannery O'Connor. You know, she's one of the great American authors, right? She was very racist, and she was very religious in a very sort of fundamentalist way. You know, things that
those two go together.
To people, I think to everybody sitting at this table would be, you know, uncomfortable to us in real life, right? But like that doesn't mean we're not going to read A Good Man Is Hard to Find and not be blown away by what a brilliant story it is. You know, I think it's okay to engage with art. I think it's okay to engage with ideas that make us uncomfortable, and I think it's okay to understand that like doing that doesn't mean that we are that. It doesn't make us that thing that we read.
Oh, it helps you grow a better understanding. To stick your head in the sand is the mistake.
Agreed.
You can't ignore all of the shit in the world because your whole life becomes an exercise in trying not to step in the shit. Sometimes you just got to step in it and just keep going. You know, and that's part of learning and improving and learning why that's bad.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, you know, it's almost like Aristotle's view of what good literature is can only be instructive and didactic in the positive. Well, no, you can also engage in the things that are contra-didactic, like teaching you bad things, and engage in it a different way, which is kind of a good way to move into the pop culture references. Many of them are, I don't want to say like throwaway lines, but like callbacks or that sort of thing. You know, we talked about Treehouse of Horror having a Cthulhu character, but I'm also intrigued into maybe getting to things like Lovecraft Country, which tries to engage in Lovecraft in a different way. I'm not going to talk about The City We Became because we hate that book.
It's horrible.
Sorry, Jemison. But that also tries to engage in Lovecraft in a different way, so it's almost like you can't engage with it if you haven't read it.
Right. Agreed. I'm looking at Mike's extensive and impressive library behind us over here.
I just want to put a picture of it on the page.
And he's got... I'm looking at Jemison right there. Other books by Jemison.
Oh, yeah, she's there.
Well, but you had such praise for her other books that it makes sense.
Yes. Just the one that I've read, the 5th season. Yes.
There it is.
Excellent book. I stand by that. But yeah, I mean, when we get into pop culture, I mean, so let me come at this again from the standpoint of someone who has been reading it for many years. Lovecraft was unknown in his lifetime. He had some writer friends that basically carried on his legacy for him and advanced it after he died of intestinal cancer in his early 40s.
Yeah, he was young.
Very young. And, some of these people were well-known writers in their own respect. For example, the name is escaping me, but the guy who wrote all the Conan the Barbarian stories.
I know the name.
Yes, it's escaping me at the moment, but that author and several others were big fans of Lovecraft. And people that, you referenced the letters before, where a lot of that racist understanding that we have of him came from, people that were the other end of that correspondence. There were a sort of almost cult following of Lovecraft that after his death, like, really continued to keep his stories in print, that got his stories published as collections for the first time.
He was in some literary circles at the time.
And so, but it began to grow in the decades after his death. Right. When I first started reading him at some point in the 1990s, he had become very popular at that point, enough so that I could find that book, and it was in just on a shelf at Barnes & Noble. But what's really fascinating to me is that even as late as my early 20s, I feel like I was still telling people about Lovecraft. I was still telling people, who are like, they like to read a certain type of fiction, like Stephen King or even Edgar Allan Poe, and I'd be like, well, have you ever heard of HP Lovecraft? You should check him out. And now that's not the case. Like, at some point in the last 15 to 20 years, his awareness of Lovecraft in pop culture has exploded so much so that it's very rare that you mention his name to someone who, not that they've read him, but they know him. Like, they're aware of him as a writer. And we've mentioned The Simpsons, we've mentioned South Park. There's a whole episode, and I mean, he's turned into video games, and he's turned into board games.
Metallica's written at least 3 songs.
Metallica's written
we're
all
talking
these
a
songs.
lot about the music.
You can go on Spotify right now. There are actually bands who exist that have named themselves after Lovecraft stories and who write songs that all reference the mythos in some way. There are very famous writers, Stephen King, Joyce Carol Oates, who have referenced him as one of their literary icons. Neil Gaiman is someone we've toyed with doing with perhaps on this podcast at some point. Huge fan of Lovecraft.
His work definitely attracts a certain type.
It absolutely does, and we've mentioned Guillermo del Toro, the film director. John Carpenter, many of his films are mentioned as being very Lovecraftian in nature. And I just pulled these 2 random books because I knew I wouldn't remember their names if I didn't pull them. Victor LaValle, African-American author. And this particular book, The Ballad of Black Tom, is a rewrite of Lovecraft's most racist story. And which is The Horror at Red Hook. And so I had mentioned when we read the book that shall not be named that this was if you want to engage, if you want to have a conversation with Lovecraft, this was not the way to do it. This was just the way to shit on Lovecraft and act like you're better than him. The Ballad of Black Tom is the answer to this question. It is the rewrite of that story, but it's told from the perspective of an African-American character, and it highlights the economically disadvantaged in New York that Lovecraft shits on in his story. And it's done, and there's actually an epigram, or it might be at the end of the book, but it says, here it is right here, for H.P. Lovecraft, with all my conflicted feelings. And it openly states, this book is both in awe and in reverence of H.P. Lovecraft, while also condemning what you stood for and trying to, have a conversation with that. And the other book I pulled here is Laird Barron, another author who has written short stories and novels that follow in that Lovecraftian tradition. So the pop culture reach is just huge. It's just awesome, and I feel like it just continues to grow with time. It just continues to pick up steam.
I just want to say Laird is a fantastic name.
I agree. Yeah. Laird Baron.
Laird
the whole
Baron.
name.
Badass fucking name. That guy.
That's a band name.
This guy
Yeah.
wears an eye patch. You want to talk about a bad motherfucker?
He has to.
I don't know if it has a picture of him here, but trust me,
Can we
the
get
man
this man
wears
on
an
the
eye
podcast?
patch.
Laird Baron, are you listening?
I believe he lives in Alaska too. I mean, he's
Well,
pretty
sure.
badass motherfucker right there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say it's even gotten to the point where I'm pretty sure you can get like a Cthulhu Funko Pop and
Yeah.
a couple of the great old ones, and I bought a couple classroom decorations, and the person who did the work, Moxiana at Moxiana on Instagram, sent me a free Cthulhu plushie because she knew that was on our logo.
Shout
And
out.
she was like, "Here it is." Yeah, shout out to her.
Ding,
Like,
ding.
great. Find her on Ko-Fi Shop for free, and it was this great little like, "Oh yeah, that's a cute thing." It's kind of creepy that it's cute. Like, that's a lot of people's shtick nowadays too,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the thing. Like it's so creepy, it's cute, and
Cutesy creep.
vice versa. Yeah, exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. So I think the 21st century is engaging with the Lovecraftian horror in kind of an interesting way. Like, you know, this world is so horrible, we might as well just love these things too.
Yeah.
He's definitely got his fingerprints all over a lot of our modern sci-fi horror trope kind of stuff.
Sure. I was thinking, I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if it's that he was part of a larger movement in the early 20th century, and it's just that it was so, like, coexistent with others that kind of started, like, kind of brought a lot of that stuff to the forefront. Like, I don't know, like Bradbury, and he came later, but you know, that same sort of concept, or like even going earlier, Jules Verne and those sorts of, like, I don't know, like maybe he's in that nascent area of where all that stuff's starting to develop, but much more overt in the last decade or so that you see Lovecraft really being embraced by, that's me you're playing footsie with,
sorry.
by the way. The
Not sorry.
being embraced by the sci-fi community, the horror community, and I think they all understand the complications of his legacy.
Yeah.
But like you said, sometimes the work transcends the author in a way that you have to try to parse them out.
Right.
To really, truly not throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a great way to put it. And it can be instructive, too. You know, I mean, because there are those of us, I mean, go ahead, go figure, like, you know, who have been reading it our whole life, who are not horrible racists because we've been reading Lovecraft. You know,
I could vouch for that.
Shocking, you know, but
Sean wants to kick Mike out of the table.
and there's, I mean,
No,
and you know,
Racist bone in you.
to go to what you said about the last 10 years, like it's gathering more and more steam. I mean, there's the Jeff Vandermeer book Annihilation, which got made into the Natalie Portman movie just a few years ago. Very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
And then there's I just watched, I think I told you guys I watched from a year or two ago, the Nick Cage movie, The Color Out of Space, which is a short story by Lovecraft. And guys, if there is someone better than Nick Cage for playing a main character in a HP Lovecraft story, I don't know who the fuck it is.
Jim Carrey?
This movie is fucking batshit crazy in the best Lovecraftian way. And Nick Cage, you're watching it the whole time going like, yeah. Yes! Every narrator in every Lovecraft story should be played by Nick Cage. It's fucking perfect.
It's
Should just be the voiceover for every audiobook.
Yeah. Right. Like, I'm only telling you this because it's driven me mad and I'm trying to save humanity!
Oh my God. Nick Cage.
Yeah.
Good reference.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, he did The Color Out of Space justice. I'll just say that.
Wow.
Great movie.
Well, you know, if you got time for your spooky season watches, there's a great one to add to your list.
Yeah, that and Annihilation, both of them.
Yeah. As things start to shift and everything dies to that dread season where we return to the Archean times. Precambrian slate falls upon us and we find dead sleep in our eyes.
That was beautiful, Adam.
Thank you.
Yeah. Man, you really embraced the language.
What I'm really doing is I'm calling back to my days of being an emo kid. And I'm just upgrading the diction as I talk.
You ever paint your fingernails black?
No, actually, I bit my fingernails for a very long time, so I could never paint them.
Still emo enough.
I wore a beanie in the summertime.
Okay.
Walked around with a guitar on college campus. And
did you play Wonderwall?
No, I couldn't play it at all. Actually, I could play one song because it was 2 chords. And they weren't power chords, but essentially they were power chords.
Okay.
And
what was the song?
That was it. It was
Smoke on the Water.
No, there you go. It was All Along the Watchtower.
That's 3 chords,
kidding.
man.
I'm kidding. It was Dashboard Confessionals.
Oh God.
Let's see. Exactly right. There you go. There's my emo face. Damn it. What's the name of the song?
It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. It's very similar. Chris Carrabba can play guitar. Not accomplished, but still can play guitar. But yeah, no, it was 2 chords. Like you could keep your hand on 4 strings and play the whole song the whole time.
Hey, but you know what? You play the guitar.
That's right.
Yeah.
Played the guitar. Had impressed a lady enough to date me a couple times in college.
There you go.
There you go.
And that is the entire purpose of the guitar.
That is the purpose.
So mission accomplished.
Yeah.
That's why Lovecraft wrote. He's briefly
Sure
married.
he was briefly married.
He was.
And it's a whole other dark story in his
that
dark
did
life.
Not work out.
Wow.
This is a man who had his father die of syphilis, a mother die probably of syphilis, a grandfather who died, and the family fortune immediately went into like drastic decline.
Yeah.
He had a wife he was married to that he had very not a great connection with, and then
But she was wealthy.
She started living in other places while they were married.
Yep.
Yeah. You start to understand the fiction the more you understand the man.
Lonely, isolated little man.
Yeah. Yeah. The world seemed like a scary ass place and way bigger than you could ever imagine. All right, so I think we've come to that time. Are we gonna give Lovecraft a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Well, I mean, I'm giving him a thumbs up, obviously.
John?
I'm conflicted. Come back to me.
Okay. I'm gonna say a thumbs up. Actually, I like the tone of his pieces. I know the payoff's not great, but it's kind of like a brooding horror that sits there for a while, and this is what I like in the fall. I could read it all the way through January.
Well said. I'm going to give him a neutral thumb. What would that be?
Thumb sideways.
Sideways thumb. Only because I'm trying to balance.
No, I'm sorry.
No,
it seems like you're giving him a thumb that does not conform to traditional understandings of Euclidean geometry.
It's got angles that shouldn't exist.
Oh,
when you
my
stare
thumb
at
has
it.
angles that shouldn't exist.
Oh my god, it does.
Oh my
god. Jesus.
Oh my god.
I have a very...
That thumb calls for italics.
It does.
I've got a Lovecraftian thumb. I don't know. No, I only do the thumb sideways because
Mike and I are holding our thumbs up.
I can't even bend my thumb like that. What the fuck?
I can't help but laugh. I'm sorry.
Why are you doing both of them?
Oh Jesus!
Just so casually. What the shit?
His thumbs bend 90 degrees, but not inwards, outwards.
Yes, yes, at angles that should not be.
Right.
Why did I break this down at the end?
There are arches and cubes on his thumbs.
It behaves like a convex angle?
Yes, and a concave as you look at it.
What the hell?
There are albino penguins on Sean's thumbs.
Good lord.
That's actually my screen name on AOL Messenger was Albino Penguin. Blind albino. No. I'm going to give him the neutral thumb, the sideways thumb, as crooked and weird as it is. Only because of the complications of the history.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also that, although I, as a appreciator of the written word, I did get down with the stories. I did enjoy reading them. I think for the majority of our cast, it's one of those, I don't want to say acquired tastes. It doesn't make sense, but like, I would say tread carefully. That's all I got. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to be mysterious and half and vague and
cryptic.
Cryptic, yeah.
You should just start speaking in mostly guttural noises. I think the one thing that helps me just to kind of put a fine point on it is he's dead.
Yeah.
Right. If he was alive, this would be a little bit more complicated because you're supporting a living actor or a living writer who might still be writing batshit crazy. Right. God, he could be on like Joe Rogan's podcast for Christ's sake if he was a living writer.
Yeah.
In which case, I would probably not support him because that would be sending money.
This is a great point. This is a great point. Absolutely. So, yeah. I think there's a lot of complex aspects to it. When you encounter it, is one aspect. How much you're willing to... when I say willing, I don't mean if you're not willing. I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean literally just how much are you willing to overlook and engage with it. And also, like you said, you don't feel like you're really... because it's not a living writing author. You're not supporting someone right now who's espousing these views. I mean, the man died 40-some years before any of us were even born. Which is not to condone his views, but it's also to say that we're not, paying him for those views, Yeah.
So it's like almost looking at, artifacts from a lost culture in a way. You're trying to instruct yourself from it. And here's the lesson, kids.
Learn to read bas reliefs in 4 hours and learn all about an ancient civilization.
Pretty much the same. It's very much akin to this. Just don't be afraid to engage fully with something.
Yes.
And to really, truly try to understand it. It doesn't make you a supporter of it. It doesn't mean you're branded now as whatever that person was. It just means that you're trying to become a more complete person yourself.
100%. You can engage with things without necessarily approving of them.
Right. And you can't disapprove of something that you haven't read.
Great point.
So, I mean,
absolutely,
you can disapprove of it afterwards and say, okay, the Carib was terrible, so let's move on. Sort of thing. Great. I think we should kind of prep the nerds for the next read then, right?
Absolutely.
As we're getting to that.
Yeah.
We're gonna do Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And are we doing the graphic novel or are we doing
the graphic novel?
Text?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And we'll have to decide what. This is only 8 of the 10 volumes.
Mike just brought over a stack of 8 of the 10.
Yeah.
Equal in height, almost equal in height to the complete fiction of Lovecraft. Though graphic novels tend to read a little faster.
So as we've done before, we should tell the audience that we haven't 100% hammered out what percent we're going to read. If it's going to be 100% or 50%, we have yet to decide. But we do know the author and we do know the work. It is definitely Neil Gaiman. It is definitely the Sandman.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, pick yourself up at least the first few. Let's say 3, 4, at least the easiest. This way we can get into oeuvre and talk as much as we can. So we'll see you next podcast for Dune the fucking movie, y'all.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so excited about this.
Can't wait.
So excited to talk movies with you, all right? So keep it nerdy and keep the drinks flowing. We'll talk to you soon.